All right, welcome everybody online as well. Hopefully you can hear us. So welcome to Canterbury Branch event for the electricity industry. So my name is Cameron, the branch treasurer. So tonight we've got presenters from Mitten Electronet to tell us about the electricity industry. So we're going to hear from Brad Henderson first up, and then that'll change over to Kieran Kennedy partway through, and then back to Brad to wrap up at the end. We're going to hold questions till the end. There's quite a lot of content to get through, so that'll be good. And Brad is the head of engineering and design at Mitten Electronet, and Kieran is our business development leader at Mitten Electronet. So I'll hand over to Brad, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, Cameron. It's great to be here. Great to be talking about my favourite topic in the world, which is electrical engineering and electricity. So I'm going to take a bit of a big picture view here today about electrical engineering, society, the world in general. I'll even dive in maybe into a little bit of political stuff towards the end. So bear with me. I'm trying to craft a story and hopefully it somewhat makes sense throughout it. And I've got to try and click that. No, click not working. Oh, it's open. Yep. Now it is. Yeah, keep me for now. Next slide, please. Oh. There we go. All right. So I want to start with a little bit of a thinking game. Who's heard of the Monty Hall problem? A couple of you. All right. It goes like this, right? There's from a game show way back in the US, and the game show host at the end of the show would say to the contestant, here are 3 doors. Behind 2 of the doors, there's a goat, and behind one of the doors is $10,000 or a car. And he'd ask what he would then do is tell the contestant, please pick a door to choose the prize from 1 to 3. And the contestant would pick a door. Monty would then go and open up one of the other 2 doors and reveal a goat. And then he would go back to the contestant and say, would you like to switch your pick to the other door? What should he do? So I'm going to leave you with that during the course of the presentation, and we'll come back to it at the end. And it ties into some of the stuff I want to cover on towards the end. That's working out good. All right, so I'm a big fan of artificial intelligence, and some of the Mitten team will have seen a presentation I did with some of the examples from DALL-E, which is a generative AI algorithm for generating pictures or illustrations. It's pretty cool. You just give it a text prompt. In this case, I was like, prehistoric humans hovering around a fire, and it takes about 30 seconds, and it gives you 9 pictures. I was pretty impressed with the results. It's pretty cool. And I guess why I did this is I want to today tell a bit of a story and hope that we don't lose, or make sure that we keep in mind what it is we're trying to do as engineers, as society. And that is to build technologies that make and use technologies that make lives better, people's lives better. And humans have been doing this for a very long time. Fire was obviously one of the very first technologies that we mastered and used to warm and cook and all that kind of stuff. But as we go forward into the future, our technologies get more and more sophisticated, hopefully, and our lives continue to get better, because that's the fundamental reason for having technology. All right, so transitioning a little bit to more on point with our topic, I want to talk a little bit about energy usage. And this is probably my favorite website. It's called Our World in Data. If you guys have never been to Our World in Data, I highly recommend it. It's got all kinds of information about the world, pretty up to date, open source. You can learn heaps of stuff about the way things are in the world, all fact checked and crowdsourced and all that good stuff. So On the left, there's the world's what they call primary energy consumption. You can see since around about the 1900s, it's just been on this massive exponential trajectory. Basically, the world can't get enough energy. But a lot of that's very highly correlated with population growth, right? So the population's exploded, the energy use has exploded, but it's also been to do with development and people wanting TVs, cars, etc., new things, warm houses, all that kind of good stuff. The interesting thing is, and what was a surprise to me, is how much of that global energy use do you think is actually electricity? If someone asked me a few years ago and said how much of the global energy is electricity, I would probably thumbs up, probably would have said 50, 60%. It's nowhere near that much, right? So on the right is the total electricity generation in the world, and it's about 25,000 terawatt hours, a little bit more. The total usage on the left-hand one's about 160, so it's like 1/6 roughly. So essentially, as a electrical engineer, one of my passions is trying to make more of this stuff. We'll make this one bigger and this one smaller, in a sense. The stuff that's not electrical, because ultimately, electrical energy can be very clean, which brings me to my next point in a second. But again, coming back to what this is all about, and I grabbed a few examples from our world in data about the world in general and what we're trying to do. And there's a lot. If you get sucked into the media, there's a lot of doom and gloom, right, about what's going on. The world's falling apart, pandemic, yada yada. Everybody's dying, there's wars, etc. But when you take a slightly longer view and you look at things that matter, like deaths in conflict, for example, plotted from 1946 to 2020, that's trending down. Polio cases trending down. Share of the world population in poverty, it's massive. So from 50% in 1981, now down to about 10%. There are specific definitions for what poverty means, but most people in the world, their lives are getting better. The share of the world that's literate, in 1800, 90% of the world couldn't read. Now it's like 10%. And that's not to minimize the problems that exist with people around the world who can't read and write. They still exist. Another measure, percentage of seats held by women in national parliaments, 25% currently. Should be 50-50, right? Half the population in the world is female, so why shouldn't half the parliaments be female? Certainly it's going in the right direction. It's a long way to go, but it's better now than it was. Things are going in the right way. So that's my message, is don't be distracted. However, there are big problems, one of which most of us hopefully know about, and that's global warming. So following the pretty similar energy, exponential trajectory to our energy consumption is our CO2 emissions. And of course, we all know what that's doing. It's causing a worldwide increase in average temperature. It's pretty undisputed now in the record, the people who still deny it, but it's hard to dispute the facts of real measurements. More importantly, what are we going to do about it? Another really cool graph that I like, just showing basically of all of the 50 billion tons of CO2 that the world emits every year, broken down into different categories. I've highlighted a couple because there's a couple where I think the electrical industry can play a role and help convert those from CO2 emitting industries into clean electrical industries which don't emit greenhouse gases. So we've got road transport, right? Many of us drive, most of us still drive fossil fuel cars. They emit CO2. That's about 12% of the world's CO2 emissions. If we can convert those to electric vehicles or some other zero emission technology, then we're going a long way for reducing a lot of the world's emissions. We can play, as electrical engineers, and engineers, we can play a big part in that. Transpower, in their wisdom, released a really thought-provoking series of documents over the last few years, Te Maori Hiko, and they followed up with Whakamana I Te Maori Hiko, looking at what New Zealand needs to do to enable electrification. And I highly recommend you have a read of these if you haven't already. The first one was in 2017, I think, and the update was 2020. Really interesting stuff. they essentially looked at the trends in the industry and said, what's going to happen over the next 30 years? And they saw two big things happening. They saw electric vehicle uptake and conversion of process heat. So that's running factories that at the moment use things like coal boilers to drive processes. They're going to convert those to maybe heat pumps, maybe electrode boilers, that type of thing, but it's going to be powered ultimately by electricity. And the numbers are somewhat disputable, but the thinking is essentially that the demand on the electrical grid is going to go up by quite a significant amount. Transpower is saying roughly doubling from now until 2050. So from 40-ish terawatt hours per year through to 75-ish plus terawatt hours per year by 2050. That's a little bit terrifying in terms of what that means for the grid. But the point of this thought-provoking paper was really just to get people thinking about what we need to do. And coincidentally, not long after this paper was released, and whether it kind of provoked it or there was other factors, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of factors relating to it, we've seen this big explosion in interest in renewable energy development in New Zealand, which is continuing on to this day, which is exciting and something that Kieran will talk a little bit more about, one project we've been involved in recently as well. So I said it's terrifying to go from 45 terawatt hours to 75 terawatt hours in 30 years. But actually, when you take a step back, we've done it before. In 1970, roughly, the consumption in the grid was about 15-ish terawatt hours. That went up to 40 in 2010. So approximately 25 terawatt hour growth in 35 years. So if we want to grow by another 35 terawatt hours in 30 years, it's in the same ballpark in terms of order of magnitude. It's doable. The difference will be that it won't be massive hydro schemes like you saw in the background that were built in the 60s and 70s. It's going to be wind, solar, a bit of geothermal, maybe a little bit of tidal, nuclear, who knows? But it's not going to be hydro because most of the good hydro sites in New Zealand are either built or are too difficult to consent. So I guess my summary from what I've found so far is I reckon we've got this. I reckon it's under control. This industry knows how to build generation. It knows how to build a grid to support the generation, and we can do it. So as I said, where's this energy going to come from? And when we're thinking about building new electrical assets, new generation assets, we primarily want to think about three things. What's safe, what's clean, what's cheap, and also what's reliable, right? So they're the four. So in terms of safest and cleanest, wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, standouts. This is deaths per, I think, terawatt hour, roughly. Coal is really bad for not just for the environment, from a safety perspective. People die from air pollution or accidents involved with coal mining. It's really challenging. There's actually some quite interesting financial analysis in the USA about if there's enough of a financial incentive just in terms of saved cost to the healthcare system to shut down all the coal plants and replace them with renewable energy, even if you forget about climate change as a thing. So it's quite interesting. And of course, when you look at greenhouse gas emissions, then again, it's no contest. Wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, way ahead of coal and oil. So it seems like a no-brainer. But then, of course, people will say, well, what about the cost? How much? We can't just build solar panels and wind farms because it costs a lot. Well, does it? One of the things that's been happening in the past decade is, well, it's been going for longer than that, but it's become more pronounced in the last decade, is the really interesting cost declines of the renewable technologies, particularly solar and wind. So this is a graph here of levelized cost of energy, which is essentially a way of doing an apples for apples comparison of different types of generation technologies. And you can see my pointer works, not on the screen. So you've got in a band in the middle here, which is roughly the fossil fuel kind of cost. And you can see solar power, solar PV, which is the most common form, only 10 years ago was way up here. It was uneconomic to build a solar farm without a government subsidy of some form, and when you're competing with fossil fuels. Onshore wind, again, 2-3 decades ago, uneconomic. But this interesting thing happens is over the years, the prices just continue to drop and drop and drop. And it's now, both of those technologies are now considered by most people, or most analysts, to be the cheapest form of new energy to build solar and wind. Cost per levelized cost of energy basis, which considers both their capacity factor and also their reliability and delivery of energy over time. So that's really interesting. So renewables now are safe, they're clean, and cost effective, which is a really good news story. It's not just renewables though, it's also batteries. So a little bit lagging behind perhaps solar PV, but the price of batteries has plummeted over the last decade. This is a slightly different presentation of a graph. This is total installed battery capacity around the world versus cost of a kilowatt hour of batteries in US dollars. So this is where I want to introduce this interesting concept of a learning rate, which is common for technology. Essentially what the learning rate means is for every doubling of production in that technology, how much does the price decrease? You're probably familiar with this from Moore's law for computers. It's like every 18 months, the equivalent number of transistors on a chip halves or doubles, and the price halves, right? That law's held pretty constant for the past 50 years. Same thing applies to certain types of technologies, solar PV, batteries, so forth. The question is always, well, how long can it carry on for? And so far, there's no signs of it slowing down. I mean, pandemic considerations aside, but pandemics affected everything. So again, you have to come back to a sort of relative measure there to really get the full picture of what's going on. So we have this concept of a learning rate, and then we can set up this virtuous cycle as technologies become cheaper with increasing production, prices fall, then they become more competitive, more people want to get it, so demand increases. Then they get deployed again and they become cheaper again as we get better at making them. Prices fall, and on it goes. And so what we're seeing worldwide with solar and wind is this big snowball that's building up in terms of momentum, in terms of cost, driving that cost pressure down and making it more viable in more markets. I worked the first part of my career in Australia, and the solar boom, I would say, probably 10 years ahead of where we are in New Zealand right now in terms of deployment. And the reason was because the resource is better over there. Probably access to capital was a bit better as well. And they had more government subsidies behind their industry as well. But so it's just, we'll get there. It's just taken us a bit longer because we've had to wait for that cost curve to come down a bit further than it had to in Australia to make projects economic. So what technologies follow this path? Well, electric vehicles, they have a learning rate of about 23%. So at the moment, EVs are expensive, relatively, but they're much less expensive than they were 10 years ago, and they're only going to get cheaper. Depending on what you read, certain predictions, cost parity with combustion engines around about 2024, 2025 is what people are saying now. So once that tipping point gets reached where you can get an equivalently range vehicle, electric vehicle compared to a combustion vehicle, then it's game over. And provided the supply chains can keep up, why would anyone buy a petrol car? Batteries, as I mentioned, they are an enabling technology, obviously, of electric vehicles. So it makes sense that if the learning rate of batteries is 90%, and so for cars, solar panels have an outrageous learning rate of 36%. Onshore wind, 23%, and offshore wind as well is getting cheaper. So this is all very exciting. I'll come back and talk about some of the problems that we still have to address in a minute after Karen talks about a case study from Waipipi.
Check there. Yeah, looks all good. Thanks, Brad, and it's a real pleasure to talk on this project. Quite a new experience for me to be presenting to people that aren't necessarily all electrical people, so that's quite cool too. And I have actually recycled a few slides from a joint presentation we did with Jim Pearson at Tilt Renewables at the EA last year. So I did want to thank Jim Pearson before I started. And just to clear up some confusion, Mercury bought Tilt Renewables New Zealand assets last year. So they're now known as Mercury. So I used the two names interchangeably a little bit. So apologies in advance if that's confusing. But really what I want to focus on today is sort of following on from what Brad's talked about is obviously this is a renewable project that we were involved with, very proud of, but particularly how fast we were able to build it. I can only really speak from our side of the project, but obviously it's not just a result of us, the audits and contractors involved, which we'll talk through, also the leadership that Tilt showed as the principal. Just click on the screen. So where is Waipipi? So it's basically 8 kilometres southwest of Waverley in the Taranaki region, not far from where you're from, Logan, so represent. So it's basically on an old beach, so an old sand site. So 800 hectares across 4 properties. So it was an Ironman site, an iron sands mining site. What did I say, Iron Man? Yeah, that's where Iron Man used to live. So that's what it used to look like back in the day, and that's what it looks like now. So I actually think we've made the site look a little bit nicer than what it used to. And just if you take one thing away from my talk, it's if you're flying from Christchurch to New Plymouth, sit on the right-hand side of the airplane, because this is a shot I got about six months ago, looking down at Waipipi Wind Farm. Yeah, all the power engineers on the talk will understand this is the sort of stuff that gets us pretty excited when we're up in the air looking out of a window. So I recommend sitting on the right-hand side of the airplane. So this is just a downward view on the site. So we've got 31 wind turbines on the site. The collector substation, which I'll go into a little bit more detail for the non-electrical people in the room, is located here. And then there's the black and white dashed line is 110,000 volt line that runs from the site back to Transpower's Waverley substation, which connects the wind farm to the wider electrical grid. So what's a wind farm made up of, and what did the team look like? So we're all aware that wind farms have wind turbines, and in this particular case, they were engineered, procured, and constructed. So it's EPC. That's a word I'll use quite a lot throughout this talk, by Siemens Gamesa, and they were contracted directly to Tilt Renewables. So they were responsible for essentially installing the turbines on site. You also had Higgins, who were known as the CBOP contractor, or the Civil Balance of Plant contractor, and what their scope is design and building the wind turbine foundations, and actually doing the roading network. There's actually quite an extensive roading network that needs to be put in with these wind farms, and they also did the bench for the collector substation. Transpower, which you can't quite see, they did the work at the Waverley substation end, so an extra 110 kV bay needed to be installed there. And then the Electronet group, known as the EBOP contractor, or Electrical Balance of Plant, essentially looked after the rest. So we went from the 110 kV line termination at Waverley substation. We designed and built the 110 kV line. We designed and built the collector substation, which is 110 to 33 kV. And then we designed and built the 33 kV collector network, which runs from the 33 switchboard in the collector substation, and the cables run to the
switchgear in each of the wind turbines. So in terms of our scope, it was Waverley substation, line bay, through to the 33 kV cable terminations to the base of the wind turbines. And the Electronet Group, that's our contracting division. We've got common ownership, and Mitten Electronet is the design consulting arm, which is where we fit in. So just a few numbers about the project. So the site has 31 turbines, as I said, and they're 4.3 megawatts each. So I'm pretty sure it's still the case that they're the largest turbines, possibly equally now, but commissioned in the country. I've already talked about the project structure stuff, but the combined capacity of the wind farm is 133 megawatts. Just to put that into context, the largest peak demand on the New Zealand grid to date has been about 7,200 megawatts. So this is about between 1 and 2% of our peak demand to date. But in terms of energy, it produces on average about 455 gigawatt hours a year. As a country, we use around the 40 terawatt hour mark. So it's providing the country with around just over 1% of its electrical energy. And these are the cool numbers for the civil structural people. You've got a hub height of 95 meters, and the highest point of the turbine tip is 160 meters. It's just a number on the screen, but when you stand under them, it looks quite amazing. And if you're ever in the Taranaki area, you can actually get pretty close on the public roads. And there's even a wee bench you can sit on and look up at them. So just a dream weekend for any power engineers. Head along and eat a sandwich underneath the, there's lots of serenity. So that's really good. I just wanted to cover off some of the project challenges, which is, generic, not just for our scope, but just, this was a challenging project. There were tight timeframes. There were really challenging geotech conditions, particularly for the wind turbine foundations. We're on an old iron sand beach, and there was a lot of lateral spread risk and things like that. And I'm not an expert in it, but I understand there was a lot of dynamic compaction required. The best way to describe that is there's a civil engineer over there nodding. Oh, excellent. Oh, nice. You're from Higgins? Oh, nice, awesome. So correct me if I'm wrong, but dynamic compaction is when you pick up a really heavy weight with a crane and then you just drop it on the ground. And you do that 1,000 times. Yep, cool. Excellent. So that helped sort out the foundations there. There was an operational farm, so there was a lot of communication there with the local farmer. You had the Hawera milk plant there, which had a railway line going through. They've got cogeneration, so coordinating with them when the outages could be. And we built it in the middle of a pandemic, so supply chain, level 4, level 3, those switch lockdowns. The project had its challenges. One of the really key things that I think Tilt showed really good leadership here is around their best for project approach and defining what best for project is. And some numbers I put up on the screen here. So if you think about what a key driver of this project is, you've got a wind farm of 133 megawatts. What does that cost every day that we're not generating? So if you times that by 24 hours, $93 per megawatt hour is the average wholesale electricity price over the last 6 or 7 years. It's not the PPA price, it's very sensitive. This is just an average. And that equates to $300,000 per day. But then you go, well, the wind farm's very rarely on at full output, depends on the wind conditions. This site's capacity factor is 39%. So on average, you'll get 39% power output. It's still $115,000 a day that you're not generating. So imagine what it's like if the deliverables a day late, 2 days late, 3 days late. So this is a really key driver for the project. And so how do we go about saving time? There's two. It's covering up a little bit, but it's all right. So the top approach is sort of a more traditional sort of design model that we're probably, a lot of us are probably accustomed to. You create a concept design. The output of the concept design is a there's a cost estimate and a proposed timeline and a scope for detailed design. When you go for detailed design tender, you allocate the detailed design, and then the detailed design is basically all the detailed drawings. That mean you can go for construction tender, and then the construction contractors have got really detailed drawings, so they know exactly what they're going to build, and they can put together relatively cheaper prices because there's lower risk, because they know exactly what they're building when they build it, and then it gets commissioned. Whereas the way the Waipipi structure was set up is you had Tilt as the principal, and then the EBOP and the CBOP that I talked about were engineering, procuring, construct contractors. So Electronet was the electrical balance of plant EBOP, and that looks a little bit different. What we have is, instead of a concept design, we call it early works, which is very similar to a concept design, but it's a slightly different outcome. Because at the end of early works, you're going to an EPC tender where you're not just pricing the detailed design, you're also pricing the procurement, and you're also pricing the construction. But you don't have that detailed suite of drawings. So the early works is really around getting that balance right between spending time, which is $115,000 a day down this end, to eliminate risk so that the contractor doesn't have to price for it. It's about getting that balance right. And then you go for tender, EPC, and then you're straight into design. And then you kind of start construction before the design's even finished sometimes, which just screams risk, right? You go, don't do that. Wait till the design's finished, then go to site and build it. But we've got this $115,000 a day down this end. So when you're in an EPC contract, if your design arm and your construction arm have really close relationships, you can actually prioritize design and get out on site before the design is finished and help save that time. So you prioritize your civil design, you get the civil guys out on site, you do your primary design, and then if you're secondary and your settings are a little bit later while they're building on site, that's okay. Yes, there's risk to manage, but it's worth it. And it's a real mature conversation around what that risk is, how we manage it. Because at the end of the day, if risk sits where it can be mitigated, that actually adds a lot of value. And then we're commissioning a lot sooner than perhaps a traditional model. So yeah, as I said, we're keeping head of design. We're doing partial design submissions, managing that risk internally, and that can be done where your EPC contractor needs to have really close relationships. We manage that by having common ownership, which makes that quite an easy mechanism for us. It sort of comes naturally, but you really do want to have an EPC contractor with close partnerships internally, and you really need to agree with the builders and the principal and the owner's engineer. Give them plenty of forewarning of when your documents are coming through for review, and agree that there'll be a single package of comments coming back rather than off to them, not to them, and off to them, and that comes back. So that saves us a lot of time as well. Transportable building really did help with our critical path as well. It was fit for purpose, met the spec, and we were able to build the switch room essentially in parallel with the site works. Another one is around the 33 kV cabling network. So we did have some luxuries with Waipipi where we didn't have to follow the road. We could cut across the beach sand where we needed to, but it's so important. And again, this is where Tilt showed great leadership, that the CBOP and the EBOP collaborate really closely on the optimum time to run cables and when to build roads. Because if we're trenching cables in a road and we're closing that road, and CBOP can't get to that next wind turbine foundation, that's just going to close things down. So you just can't overstate the importance of having the collaboration and basically coordination meetings to make sure we're not unnecessarily closing roads. And from a design point of view, it's really important for your design team to understand the implications of perhaps moving things. A traditional design, it might mean, doesn't matter whether your joint pit's there or there for your power cables, but in this scenario, if your joint pit's on the wrong side of the T intersection, and you've got to wait for them to join that cable, and you're closing that road for an extra 3 days, that's, what is it, $115,000 times 3? It's really important stuff to consider.
Yeah. You might have asked how Tilt set the project up in a way that you got that collaboration, aside from choosing good guys who going to play friendly. When it comes to the crunch, those good intentions can go out the window, right? So how do they set it up so that actually?
Yeah. So the key thing I think is Tilt contracted Siemens Gamesa directly, the contract CBOT, and then EBOT, and then this is a big risk for them. It can add a lot of value if they manage that right. Because some projects, you might have the principal engage just a full RAP EPC, and then they do everything, and then the principal's kind of lost that ability to influence. And then it was really Tilt getting everyone in the room reasonably frequently and just going, what are you doing this week? What are you doing today? On site every day. Yeah, it's essentially how so yeah, it's really all about understanding the key drivers of the project. What does best for project actually mean? Because for some projects it isn't time. If you've got a piece of switchgear to replace, it doesn't matter if it's Tuesday or Thursday, and you'd rather have less risk in the contractor and take longer, that may be a better approach. But when you've got projects where time is of the essence, this is a really good contracting model to follow. Having a real mature conversation around allocating of risk. It's in no one's best interest to lump risk where it can't be mitigated because price just shoots up. Agree where risk should sit, and it should really sit with where it can best be managed. Putting the right teams in place, and I just can't overemphasize enough the importance of communication. Like I was saying, Jevon just now, weekly design team meetings, weekly DVD is the design and construct steering groups that we have between our design and build arms. Can't forget the protection and comms guys. They don't like being left out. And then you've got your regular interface meetings between owner's engineer, principal, and the contractor. So what the result was is we kicked off early works in August 2019. Notice to proceed. So that's the start of the DVD with 4th of September, and had full generation within 18 months. And we got our first turbine on within 14 months. So and that's with a pandemic in there, which I think only delayed the project by about 2 weeks, which we're pretty proud of. Thank you.
All right, so I've been giving the rosy picture so far. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I think collectively we face with a bit of a lens on the electricity industry. So the first one I want to talk about is the energy trilemma. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I call the disinformation apocalypse that we're living in now. And finally, a little bit about human resources. All right, so a couple of weeks ago, had the privilege of listening to some of our young engineers take on the energy trilemma, and I'll give you the really quick, skinny summary, which won't be anywhere as good as the young engineers who presented at a recent summit that we had. But essentially, when we're thinking about energy and supplying energy, there's three things that we're trying to essentially maximize. We're trying to make sure that the energy supply is secure, so we have the energy available when we need it and in the quantity that we need. We want to make sure that it's environmentally sustainable, i.e. we're not, obviously, probably not emitting greenhouse gases, etc., destroying the environment, all those kind of things. And we also want it to be affordable and available. So we want to make sure that everybody can afford to have their basic needs met, their house heated, etc., enough energy to cook with, that kind of stuff. So this organization called the World Energy Organization, they put together, the World Energy Council, sorry, they put together this trilemma, and they rank countries against each other with a kind of metric to see how you're performing. New Zealand actually ranks really well in the trilemma. I think we're 9th in the world, but we've been 9th for quite a long time, and it doesn't mean we should take our eye off the ball when it comes to security, especially. And energy security has been in the news recently in New Zealand. last year on the 9th of August, which is coming up again. So we had a blackout as part of the country. It was a planned blackout. So there was a loss of supply to parts of Hamilton caused by load shedding. So by controlled switching action, it wasn't a cascade failure or anything like that. But roughly 30,000 odd customers in the Hamilton region lost electricity on what was one of the coldest nights of the year. So this caused a massive media calamity, right? And the minister was on the news. General managers from Transpower were talking on the news. Who's to blame for this power outage that's happened? And of course, about 60,000 investigations were then ordered by the government in order to figure out what happened. One of which MB did, which was actually really insightful. So I will just cut to that and talk a little bit about what actually happened that night, because I think it's important to have the context of why the event that happened. So there was about 34,000 households that lost power on that evening in the 9th of August. One thing that's MB kind of minimised a little bit, but I don't think it should be that minimised, in my opinion, was that particular night, New Zealand set a new record peak demand. So about close to 7,200 megawatts. Transpower, not quite sure where it would have got to if it wasn't the load shedding. It might have got 7.2, 7.3. This is a graph showing the previous demand peaks for the last decade, well, actually last 2 decades, going back to 1997. We've actually been pretty flat peak demand in New Zealand for the last decade up until last year, sitting around that sort of 6,500 megawatts. And so you can't really blame Transpower and say we weren't really expecting this, because demand hasn't been growing in New Zealand. So it's still a bit of a mystery as to why this happened last year, like why all of a sudden 600 megawatts of peak demand appeared in the system from nowhere. Combination of pandemic, population growth, pent-up demand, maybe energy efficiency measures, people replacing compact bulbs with compact fluorescents and LEDs and stuff. That's all kind of rolled off and done its dash. So maybe we're back to a normal demand grows with population kind of cycle happening now. Or maybe this is the first kind of influence we're seeing of some of this new load, like electric vehicles, heat pumps, things coming onto the system. Maybe, hard to say, but it's worth remembering that it was a peak, a new record demand. We're getting close to, a couple of weeks ago, we got close to 7,000 again this year. So it wasn't a one-off either. It's like 7,000 megawatts is here to stay for our peak demand, and it's going to get bigger, and it's a problem that needs to be managed. So what happened at the time was there was a shortfall of generation. So for those of you who are not electrical and not familiar with the power system, it has to maintain a absolute balance at all times, i.e. generation must equal load plus losses at every moment in time. So if the load keeps increasing, we have to find generation from somewhere to balance that load. The capacity of the New Zealand power system is, if everything was running, is about 10,000 megawatts. So we've got plenty of capacity in there that was all switched on at the same time. But of course, it never is, because some stuff's getting maintained, some stuff's not available because of various reasons, or it's just not bid in because it's too expensive. Like we've got a diesel power station in Whirinaki that hardly ever runs because it's very expensive. So Transpower saw this coming earlier in the day, and they issued a code red, or called a grid emergency notice, telling the generators that you need to increase your offer to the market to provide more generation because we're expecting this big load peak. Unfortunately, what happened around the time of the load peak was that there was a failure at Te Kanu power station. So it's a hydro power station. There was weed caught in the intake for one of the station that caused about 60 odd megawatts to fall off the system at around the peak time, and also Waipipi, blame Waipipi, it started ramping down around that time. It was a natural fall off of wind that happens quite often at that time of night. And the media kind of ran with this a little bit at the time. They're like, oh, the wind generation's unreliable because the wind fell away and we had a blackout. It's not really the cause of the problem. What actually happened was the system operator was like, okay, we've got a problem. The generators are not increasing enough. We've had a couple of events, so they decided we need to shed some load. So originally they're asking for 1%. And the way that the code is written in New Zealand at the moment is that 1% has to be sent out equally across the whole country, so that all the electricity distribution businesses, 29 of them, in New Zealand, they all have to find that 1%. Unfortunately, the notice they sent out was faulty. So there was an error in that notice, particularly the one that went to Well Networks, which is the one that looks after the Waikato and Hamilton. And they ended up getting a notice to say, I think it was shed roughly 10% of their demand. And they looked at this and they thought, that doesn't seem right. And so they called up Transpower and they're like, doesn't seem right, that's a bit much. And Transpower's like, nope, you need to get rid of 10% or whatever. And so they did. So they shut off 30,000 customers on the coldest night of the year and everybody froze. So, and they have to, because that's the code. The code says that if Transpower says, or the system operator says, you must shed load, you must shed load. And so they did. But ultimately, this is just a failure of communication. That's all it was. We had enough fuel and enough generation to supply that load at the moment. Even Contact Energy rang up the system operator furious because they'd turned on their big diesel car station in Hawke's Bay, and they said, we're only running at half capacity, but you told us to put the whole thing on. Where's the rest? No, well, we don't need it because we've shed too much load. So the system over-responded. So it was a bit of a disaster from an operations point of view for the network, and it was totally avoidable. But I think this is the first time this has happened since the electricity market came into being in 1996. So some of the procedures that perhaps Transpower had have now been looked at because of this, and they've improved their processes and learned a whole bunch from this. And so hopefully this type of thing won't happen again. But it's just a reminder that a lot of the problems that we have are human-centric, right? It's a human failure of humans to communicate has ultimately been the root cause of this problem. All right, problem number 2, what I call the disinformation apocalypse. So the internet's a wonderful thing, well, is it? So I was doing a bit of a thought experiment earlier in the week. I was like, would the world be better if the internet never came around? The problem today, I think, that a lot of people are talking about is that there's just so much information available, and it's very hard for everybody to look at this information and understand what is true and what isn't true. And our brains are not equipped to handle this information. It's very stressful when you're getting bombarded by all this stuff. You're like, what's real? What do I do? And it's natural. It's a natural human response to gravitate towards things that are emotionally triggering. It's the whole fight or flight thing. So you see, it's a disaster happening in somewhere in the world. There's a war in Ukraine. There's all these things. We naturally gravitate to this. Or some, friends had a catastrophe or something on Facebook. You gravitate towards this. The social media companies know this, and they use this to pull us apart. It's no secret. There's plenty of evidence of this around the world. It's a real problem. And what I use to remind myself of this is like, we think stuff is free. Like you go on social media site, it's free. All this information is free. But I like to remind myself that if something is free, you're not the customer, right? You're the product. And it's worth reminding yourself of that when you think, oh, this is free and this great service that I'm using. Maybe it's not. And we see the problems that this causes today all around us, right? So we had 23-day protests in Parliament in this country, largely caused by disinformation. In Russia, more than half of the population supports the war in Ukraine because they're getting fed propaganda from the government. And misinformation feeds things like vaccine hesitancy. We have that debate here. The majority of the public think genetically modified foods are unsafe. That's not true. They're safe. All scientists, it's been proven beyond a doubt. We had a controversy the other day about a sentient AI. Is it really sentient? No, it's not. But what do you believe? It's really challenging. I think the antidote to a lot of this is cultivating critical thinking skills, and it has to happen not just across engineers, it has to happen across society. But I think engineers have a really important role to play in fostering critical thinking amongst the young people and amongst our peers and amongst our friends and our family, helping to build a common understanding or find common ground amongst different people. I think it's really important to talk and socialize with people who disagree with you, right? It's really, really important. And try to find some common ground, because it's helpful to remember that the things that unite us are much greater than the things that divide us, right? So there's common ground to find with everyone. And I really like this concept of being a citizen in the ancient Greek context, and I think it's really powerful. And it's about, if we're a citizen of democracy, I'm particularly talking about here, it comes with some rights, right? We get a right to vote. We have a right to, in New Zealand, for example, a right to basic income if we can't get a job, these types of things, right to healthcare, all these things. But what we sometimes forget about is it also comes with some responsibilities, right? So, and one of those responsibilities is to participate, is to give back to your community, be involved in debate, talk to people, mentor, teach, be enthusiastic about science, technology, engineering, and medicine. What's the M stand for again? And you know, at Minden Electronet, we've got some people involved in the Wonder Project. I think it's a really great initiative, helping young people get excited about science. I don't know if a few other people in the room are involved as well in that project. And it's things like that that I think are really, really powerful about sending the message about, you know, being positive about the future of technology and science and how we can all play a role. All right, problem number 3, dear to my heart, it's the people challenge, right? So this is the unemployment rate in New Zealand, going back to 1986, pretty much at an all-time low at the moment. I think it doesn't capture the last little bit, but it's pretty much the same from what I understand. It's really hard to find good people at the moment. It's really, really difficult. Everybody who wants a job basically has a job at the moment. And obviously you can imagine for highly skilled jobs such as engineering, that pressure is even higher, right? So harder to fill those roles because highly skilled people are harder to come by. What do we do about it? Well, we try to, you know, retain staff as best we can and find staff. And for me, you know, I reflect on my career and what's been important to me in the roles that I've had. And I think for me, there's 3 main things that make me want to stay at a company or make me enjoy the job that I'm doing. The first one is what I'm doing meaningful to me and the wider world? Am I involved in great projects, exciting work that's helping make the world better? That's item number 1. Am I working with really great people? You know, and this is a bit of a shameless plug for Minden Electronet. I love the team that I work with here, and every day come in and there's great conversations that I had, and I overhear people talking about really interesting things, and it's really, really great, and I really enjoy that. And of course, the other one is being fairly rewarded, right, for the stuff you do. So I really think it's important not to take your eye off the ball on any one of these things, because that's why people leave companies, right? If they're not getting paid well enough, the work they do sucks, or the people they work with are really annoying. Right? So yeah, so that's kind of what as engineers and as our companies, what we have to work towards, making sure that we sit in that happy place in the middle of the Venn diagram. Cool. All right, just about done. So take homes. My view is that we've got a bright future ahead of us. I think, contrary to what you might hear in the media, I think today is actually the best time to be alive. I'm glad that I live in 2022 and not 1922 or 1822 or any time before that. yeah, there's problems. There's big problems, right? Climate change, energy trilemma, disinformation, people. A lot of problems that we can solve them. And I think the change in the world will be made by everyone here, by you. Let's get to it. Cool. Monty Hall. All right, back to Monty Hall. I'm going to put someone on the spot. What should I pick on? So, Emily. Monty's asked you, would you like to change doors? Should you change or not change? Why? Yeah, spot on. Yeah, so once he shows you there's a go, when you look at the 3 doors, there's a 1/3 probability that the cache is behind one door, and when he opens you one of the doors to show you, okay, there's a goat there, it takes away that 1/3. So you're left with the one door the other door that you didn't pick, I should say, that's left, which takes on that 1/3 probability. You can game it out. It's a real mind bender. The best kind of explanation that I saw online is you sort of just go through the different options. It's sort of like a poker kind of thing. You put them all out, basic statistics, but sort of go through the options. If you pick this door and the prizes behind that door, then probably blah blah blah, and you just game out each thing. And it's actually only 9 different combinations. So if you don't change, yep, you've got a 1/3 chance of winning. But if you do change, you've got a 2/3 chance of winning. So you should always change. But interestingly, in the game show, people almost never changed. They're like, oh no, he's trying to trick me. Kind of, yeah. So statistics can help you. Cool. That's it. Questions? Karen on the top. Share the slides. Yep, we can share the slides. Yep.
So we can share the slides is the answer to one of the questions. Another question, so Brad talked about falling cost of lithium ion batteries. What data is there about the emissions and safety costs of battery production?
Yeah, I can take that question. I'm not an expert in how to make lithium ion battery by any stretch, but common concerns that people talk about is, rare earths type of thing, cobalt mining in Congo, for example, with slave labor. Yep, so it's a real issue in terms of mining, but I think it's sometimes easy to lose perspective in this. It's not as if you have a car without a battery that all of the materials that went into that car magic themselves up from the sustainable place, right? You've got to be careful to compare apples with apples. So batteries, yep, they have an environmental footprint themselves, but most of the analyses I've seen, when you compare it over a life cycle, it's far less of an impact than, for example, the cumulative emissions of a combustion vehicle over its life. From when you think about all of the mining and processing that goes into getting that oil from the oil field into your car. Hope that answers that question.
Let's read out the next one.
Yeah, is there scope to combine wind and solar farms on the same land?
Oh, yeah. I honestly don't know the answer to that.
I can talk a little bit about that. Yep, it happens. Yep. Certainly in Australia, there's been a few examples of wind and solar being put on the same site. They can be quite complementary resources. So obviously sometimes the sun shines and the wind doesn't blow and blah, 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 vice versa. So that's, yep, definitely. Again, it comes down to economics, but they are quite complementary. Long question from Connor. Solar and wind are like clear winners today, but they don't necessarily produce power when we need it. In fact, they can often generate when we need the power. Cold night. Often can't generate when we need the power, i.e. cold night, storms, wind, etc. Do you agree that energy storage is key to the transition? Do you think government is doing enough to incentivize studies, applications of different storage types, e.g. pump storage, lithium-ion, hydrogen, etc.? Yeah, 100%. You're exactly right. You can't store electrical energy without a battery or without some kind of pump storage scheme. We are very blessed in New Zealand that we have these massive hydro lakes in the South Island that are effectively stored energy. So our system has a lot of room to add wind and solar at the moment before we get anywhere near causing system problems. I'm minimizing it a little bit. You know, there's devil in the detail there, and obviously pockets where that's not quite true. But my view is that it's hard to pick winners in this approach. I think we'll definitely need more storage. We're seeing some projects emerge at the moment around big battery storage. Obviously, Onslow is being investigated as the pump storage option as well. Hydrogen, it's in there in the mix as well. Again, not to pick winners, but there will be a need for more storage, definitely.
If you research the Inter Battery project, it's pretty good if you want to do more reading. Yep.
Has the wind farm site been assessed for sea level rise?
Just turns into an offshore.
Yeah.
What's the impediment to cogeneration time in New Zealand? There's very little cogeneration in New Zealand.
You mean we use a lot of waste heat to
Yes. So, for example, CDHB's just rebuilt quite large boiler gas central city. There is no electricity generation built into that site, which is right beside quite a major user of electricity and low-grade steam.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. It seems like a no-brainer. If you've got waste heat, why wouldn't you use it to generate if you could? I don't know.
There was this Virginia that made a cogeneration in Christchurch and then it's gone under, so economics.
Yeah, it's usually the answer.
Yeah.
With another one's cogen at north of Hamilton, they've just given up on it.
Yeah, I mean, all these things require maintenance and a lot of capital investment, right, to get them across the line. So that may be the answer.
It's going to comment to ask about solar because I know in Europe, particularly Germany, they're actually backing off on solar farms because they don't want too much arable land taken up in production. You've got, Japanese, I think they've new builds, they actually have to put in solar on the building. So there's this push in other countries to always cite it on existing structures. Do you think that's something we should consider in New Zealand? Or do you think we've got plenty of land we can cover with solar panels?
Yeah, does it have to be either or? Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of rooftop solar. I've got panels on my house at home. I think that there's a great opportunity to maximise roof space effectively doing nothing. Right, so I think it's a yes. Let's do rooftop, but I think it's a yes and let's do large scale as well where we can. I think at the moment there's a bit of a land grab going on around New Zealand at the moment, trying to secure good solar sites that are near transmission infrastructure, primarily, or near distribution infrastructure. That I think it's largely almost already played out. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next 3 or 4 years. Germany paid higher for PV on structures, but people just build cheap barns to put the solar on. Yeah, so that Gary could probably talk a little bit about that. Thanks, Philip, about misaligned incentives and economics and stuff. So there's big subsidies in Germany. So yeah, the farmers would find it cheaper rather than to do farming. They just build a barn and put solar panels on it because they get paid more from the government for solar panels. So you have to be in New Zealand. To New Zealand's credit, or depending on what your perspective is, we've never subsidised solar in New Zealand, and the argument was because it creates perverse incentives, and I think it's true. But Germany, if you like, took one for the team, team world being, because what they did was they bootstrapped an industry, and you can make an argument to say that what Germany did by subsidising solar bootstrapped a lot of Chinese manufacturers in order to get the panels developed, get the industries up and running, created that demand, and got us on that learning curve that got the solar panels down to sort of where they are today. So
shut all the nuclear down and fired all the coal plants back up.
yeah, I know. Yeah, so let's not get started on the nuclear debate.
Brad, you talked about electrical generation. Is the generation of electrical engineers a worry?
Yeah, 100%.
This is the comment I heard 2 days back from an Australian customer.
Yep.
Saying, do you have the people to do this? Because in Australia, you cannot find an electrical engineer to do a project. They are cold. Do you see that in? Yes.
Do you know any?
Yeah, look, it is a challenge. And I guess that's sort of touching on some of that stuff with things like the Wonder Project and getting more people interested and involved in engineering from a young age. And we all have a role to play in that, it's encouraging people. And, I'd like to see a more equitable workforce, I guess. So, greater female participation in engineering as well. It's still not, it's like 20% something at the moment. So, there's a huge part of society that we're missing out on at the moment because we're not sending the right messages to young girls basically about engineering's cool and fun and everybody can do it. So we have some great female engineers at Electronet, but they're still the minority, right? So it's we want to see more.
Sweet on the spot, Neil. What's the third project class size on that? Or is it up, down, or
30 something out of 50, but actually this year our intake has gone up quite sizably, but that was because mechatronics capped and the overflow went into electricals. So we got a
engine process?
so we I think that's 9. We'll see a sizable increase this year. We'll start with this great action. And that will flow through to the other as it goes through.
It's a really big challenge, one of the big challenges.
Where does hydrogen, or where do you think hydrogen as a generation source will fit into New Zealand as a whole?
I'm a little bit skeptical about the hydrogen revolution. It's been 20 years in the. It's one of those. It's a bit like nuclear fusion, right? When will we have nuclear fusion? In 50 years' time? They've been saying that since 1970. It's still 50 years away. Notwithstanding some big projects that are happening in Europe, but hydrogen. It's important to remember that hydrogen is not a source of energy. It's an energy carrier at best, right? So you've got to make the hydrogen. How do you make the hydrogen in a clean way? With electrolysis from renewable energy. The problem with that is that you throw about 2/3 of the energy away from making it to when it's consumed, that's just thermodynamics. You can't get around that. So that makes it very challenging economically for hydrogen to compete. At the moment, the world uses a lot of hydrogen for various purposes, mainly to make fertilizer. 98% of that hydrogen is made from fossil fuels. So we absolutely need to green hydrogen. But should we be using it to power trucks and things? Not so sure.
I'm probably a little less skeptical than Brad. We have a lot of arguments about this, which is good.
Yeah.
Why
do people you disagree with? Right?
Yeah, and I think I would keep an eye on what's happening in Japan because they've got some real issues. They've got a population of 125 million. They're only 50% larger than New Zealand in terms of land area. And since Fukushima happened, nuclear is just politically not acceptable anymore. And, as carbon prices go up, as we reach 2050, they're going to have to import their energy from somewhere. And that could drive a global market of green hydrogen or ammonia or something like that. And so we'll see how that plays out. So we'll see. Yeah.
They're also leading some flow battery.
Yes.
That's a good place to wrap it up. So for all those still online, we'll look to wrap it up as well. So thanks to Myth and Electronet and Brad and Kieran for your insights tonight. So looking forward to seeing if we get over 7,200 megawatts this year without a red notice. So let's see. I know there's some challenging outages coming up through the winter period, so I'll be interesting to see how Transpower manages those. So, but thanks to Brad and Kieran tonight, and thanks to all those online and for your questions in the room and online. So, thank you.